Now, 2022 marks 70 years since Queen Elizabeth II ascended to the British throne. This makes her the longest serving monarch in United Kingdom history, having already surpassed the previous record holder, Queen Victoria, back in 2015. But with this milestone comes many questions about the future of the monarchy. It's easy to forget that Elizabeth II is not just the Queen of the United Kingdom, but also of more than a dozen Commonwealth realms that were formerly part of the British Empire. Last year, Barbados became the most recent one of those countries to walk away from monarchy and become a republic. Could more follow in Barbados' footsteps in due course? I'm joined today by Sandy Biar of the Australian Republican Movement, who's here to discuss Australia's past, present, and future relationship with the Crown. Sandy, how's it going?
Very well. How are you going?
Not too bad at all. Slight time difference, as you can probably tell from the shades of our backgrounds, but here we have it. Okay.
Yeah, you've been very, very accommodating, James. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so as I just said, it's Jubilee year this year. What's the hype like in Australia? Is it something that's getting much attention over at your end?
Look, not very much. The government has tried to build it up and create a bit of hype around it, but it ranks as probably a 30 rank issue in Australia, I would say, at the moment. And certainly, I mean, we had government buildings lit up in purple a couple of weeks back, and I think most people missed it. But that was about the extent of the recognition of that milestone here, with a tiny bit of media coverage. So, I mean, we commissioned some research last year that actually found that only 36% of Australians know that the Queen is actually Australia's head of state. And despite the fact that she's been on the throne, the Australian throne even, for 70 years. And so for many Australians, they're not even aware that the Queen is our head of state. And that's one of the challenges that we've got as a campaign for change, to actually get out there and explain what our current system of government is and why we think it's time that we moved on and had our own head of state.
Well, every country has a different reason for wanting to abolish the monarchy. So, for example, with Barbados, that was tied in with the history of slavery and colonialism. What's the case for Australia abolishing the monarchy then?
Well, I think it simply comes down to every independent, self-respecting country should have one of its own citizens at the head of its country. And there may be a time, if we go back 120 or 150 years ago, when most Australians saw themselves as British first and Australian second, but that time has long since passed. And Australians today overwhelmingly see themselves as Australians. We have Australians come from all different corners of the world. And so in terms of our modern nation today, our multicultural nation, the British monarchy simply can't represent Australians anymore. And many would argue he is very much the icon of Britain. And certainly Australians see themselves as different to the UK and separate to the UK and independent of the UK. So as an independent country, we should have one of our own citizens as our head of state.
Of course, back in the 1990s, of course, there was a referendum on abolishing the monarchy in Australia. It didn't pass, albeit by a narrow margin. Why did that happen? What was the reason why Australia rejected a republic beforehand? And what's changed now?
Well, the polls at the time actually showed that there was majority support for Australia becoming a republic, for an Australian republic. And the challenge at the time was very much about finding that common agreement about what would replace our current system of government in terms of what changes would actually need to be made. In 1999, they proposed that the Parliament, by a 2/3 majority, would choose who our head of state is. That would be the Prime Minister nominates to the Parliament a candidate, and then the Parliament signs off on that. That at the time, that was actually quite an unpopular approach. And the polls leading up to that referendum showed that there wasn't going to be enough public support for that referendum to pass. the referendum threshold in Australia for changing our constitution is a really high one. It's not simply an advisory vote. It's actually mandated in our constitution that it needs to be a majority of the vote nationally, as well as 4 out of 6 of our states need to pass that. So a majority of states need to have a majority in their own jurisdictions for that change to happen. So it's quite a high threshold. Only 8 of 44 proposals for constitutional change have succeeded in Australia. It's a higher level of support than any of our major parties need to even govern the country. And so there's a high threshold there that needs to be reached. And so that's why recently we announced an alternative model and a different approach for Australia to become a republic, and that could be put forward to a referendum. One of the challenges in the lead up to the 99 campaign and during that campaign was that Australians overwhelmingly said that they wanted to vote for who the head of state was. And the proposal that was being put forward last time didn't allow them to do that. So what we proposed this time around is where all Australians would get a chance to vote from a short list of candidates that had been put forward and nominated by Australia's parliaments right across the country. So then they can choose who they want to represent them as head of state. And that's a really important step forward so that Australians will finally have a head of state who can represent them.
Obviously, there's a general election coming up in Australia this year. Could be up for a change of government. Current opinion polling is suggesting that the Labour Party, which of course has an official policy of republicanism, could be in with a chance of winning. Does this make you feel optimistic?
Well, look, there's actually strong support among both major parties for Australia to become a republic. And so the challenge for us as a campaign is to make sure that that gets back on the agenda and that we work with those supporters in Parliament. So at the moment, we have in Australia, there's 2 houses of Parliament. There's the House of Representatives, the lower house from which the government is formed, and the Senate, an elected upper house. And at the moment, 60% of both houses support Australia becoming a republic. Yes, the Labor Party, the Federal Labor Party has a position in favour of a republic, as do the Australian Greens. On the coalition side, so in Australia, there's the Liberal Party and the National Party. Among Liberals, there are twice as many Liberals that support a republic than oppose a republic in the federal parliament. And so these are really heartening numbers for us, but the challenge is to build that consensus around the proposal about the way forward and to get it on the agenda. And so that's why we've been scaling up our campaign in recent years to bring in tens of thousands of new Australians into the campaign, so we can start to apply that pressure, get it back on the agenda and have that conversation.
Are you anticipating it being a big talking point during the upcoming election campaign? Or do you see it more likely being shadowed by other issues?
Well, there's a lot going on around Australia and across the world at the moment that are likely to, other issues that are likely to probably steal the limelight, from this. But we'll be working hard to get as much attention on it as possible. And certainly we recognise that this is a longer term campaign. It will take some time before Australians feel comfortable and informed about making the decision we're asking them to make. And so we recognise that this is going to take a number of years to get back to having another national vote. And so we want to make sure that when that opportunity arises, when the political agreement is there, that there's the support there across the Australian community for that referendum to pass.
A lot of critics of the idea of republic might say it would be good to have an apolitical head of state, be good to have a constitutional monarch that might be complementary to a democracy, to a parliamentary democracy. What would you say to that criticism?
I'd say that the idea of hereditary rule, where a position in society is passed down from one generation to the next of one particular family, where people don't get to choose who that person is, where there's no democratic accountability. I'd say that monarchy and democracy are at opposite ends of the spectrum, and that in a modern society, in a society that prides itself on equality, on equal opportunity, on people having a say about how their country is run and participating as citizens, that monarchy is completely inappropriate in a modern democracy like Australia or even like the UK. And so I certainly don't believe that a constitutional monarchy or monarchy in general contributes to Australian democracy. I see that as a natural tension, and I think the history of the UK shows that tension. Where between the monarch and the parliament, and over time, history has erred towards greater democracy in places like the UK, and Australia's inherited that tradition as well. And so this really is the natural next step in Australia's evolution as a country, to do away with the monarchy and make sure that we've got democracy from the top right through our system of government.
Of course, Barbados became the latest Commonwealth realm to move away from monarchy last year. How did you react to that news?
Well, look, it's always nice to see another member of the Commonwealth become a republic. At the moment, that leaves only 15 of 54 Commonwealth countries, with the Queen as head of state. And so Barbados joins the overwhelming majority of Commonwealth nations who are already republics. And look, we'd love to see Australia join those ranks of Commonwealth republics soon too. And that's what we're working hard to get to.
And of course, one of the big questions that often comes up, what about the flag? Is the flag going to change when the Queen goes?
Well, we see that as
when the monarch goes, whoever it may be at the time.
We see that as a very separate issue. The question about our flag is another question of symbols and whether or not that represents us as a nation. There's a variety of views within our ranks as to that question and across Australian society, but we're really focused on Australia becoming a republic and those reforms. We think that those are the most important ones to pursue and the ones that really matter in this respect. And I should say, in relation to your last question about Barbados as well, it really showed that countries who do become a republic can not only stay in the Commonwealth, but have a really amicable ongoing relationship with the UK, but also even with the Crown. So with Prince Charles, for instance, attending the very ceremony at which Barbados became a republic, it's a good example of how it doesn't in any way need to be disrespectful separation, but it can be actually a new revitalized relationship between those countries and the Crown and the UK. Look, there's only positives to this change, absolutely no negatives, and so we're working hard to get out there and make the case for that.
In all likelihood, what would you see as a likely time frame for this transition towards a republic? Are we looking at it happening within the current Queen's lifetime, or are you looking at something far more long term?
Well, that's the thing about hereditary rule. We don't know how long the Queen will live for. We don't know how long the Queen's reign will go for. She could live as long as her mother, for instance. And it could still have quite a way to go. But look, the important thing is that as a country, we're ready to make this change on our terms. We're an independent country. The Queen has always acknowledged that and said that this is a matter and a decision for the Australian people to make for ourselves. And so that's why we're getting out there and having this conversation with the broader Australian community, and making sure, again, when the opportunity comes to make that change, that Australians feel comfortable and informed about that change.
Sandy, thanks very much for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks very much, James.